in your
Not the back row.
no, it's honorary back row. Hi, Harry. Yeah, the back row. Inside your bulletin, we're not going to use this right now, but I want to make you aware of it. There's a little handout called God's Story, Our Story. And this is for you to use during the week, but this is also what we use for our Wednesday night Bible study at 6:30 downstairs. So you're welcome to bring yours. I'll have extras. And you don't even need to bring a Bible with you to Bible study if you can believe that. We will have Bibles for you that you can use while we're down there. Today our reading is from Exodus chapter 3 verses 1 through 15. If you'd like to follow along in your pew Bible, you can do so on page 56 and a little bit of 57 as well. This is the story of Moses and the burning bush. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. It's not Jethro Bodine. That's Jethro the priest of Midian. All right? And he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a land that is good and spacious, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, The God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, What is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, Say to the Israelites, The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. First service, Greg told our accompaniment for that service played that song, Here I Am, Lord, is it I? Which is a reference to the story of the call of Isaiah. We read about the call of Moses, but that song has to do with the call of Isaiah. And Isaiah sees God in his mighty throne room, and God is asking, Who can I send to go warn the people? And Isaiah's like, send me, here I am. When God appears to Moses, Moses has one excuse after another, and he finally winds up just getting honest and saying, Please, Lord, send someone else. That's what he says here in chapter 4, verse 13 in Exodus. Send someone else. See, Moses doesn't really want to do what God has asked him to do. He's got some very compelling reasons for doing that. If you're familiar with the story of Moses, or maybe you saw that Disney movie a while back, you know that Moses was saved from the river by Pharaoh's daughter, and he grows up in the temple, and he's not the temple, in the palace rather of Pharaoh, and he's schooled in all of the great learning and everything. I mean, he's really kind of spoiled there for the first 40 years of his life. But then he sees his Israelite brothers and sisters. He sees one in particular who's being harassed and beaten up by an Egyptian, and he decides, I guess, to kind of take matters into his own hands to liberate this individual. But he winds up going and looking around and seeing anybody, kills the Egyptian, buries him in the sand. Word gets out, and he goes on the run. He's 40 years old, and he goes on the run from the law. Moses is murdered. And he leaves Egypt, and he goes to this little country, goes to Midian, and there he meets up with the priest, the local priest, and the priest has a daughter, and then he winds up marrying the priest's daughter, and settles down. They have a kid or two, and he's tending the flocks. He spends some time taking care of the flocks. As a matter of fact, he spends the next 40 years of his life taking care of the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro. One day he's out there in the field, and he looks and he sees fire. Now, if you're out in a field and you see fire, that's a very dangerous thing. Those wildfires can scorch the earth. But the funny thing about this fire is it doesn't get any bigger. There's a bush on fire, and it doesn't get any more on fire. And it doesn't get any less on fire. That's weird. So he goes to check it out, and then that's when God encounters him and says, I have seen the oppression of my people Israel, and I am sending you, yes, you, to go and deliver them. Did I mention to you that Moses is 80 years old at this point? 80 years old, comfortable, not exactly a thrilling lifestyle by any stretch of the imagination. Not exactly taking advantage of all the training and everything he had in the first part of his life, but it's comfortable, it's a living. And now God is asking him to uproot himself and go do something that seems totally impossible. Not only was it something impossible, but it's something that Moses tried to do once before. Dependent solely on himself, he tried to bring liberation one Hebrew at a time, but he wound up killing the guy, and now he's on the run. God wants him to go back there. Maybe people have forgotten. It's a whole different Pharaoh. Moses hasn't forgotten. Moses recalls that day. And so when God says, I want you to go to release the Israelites, I'm going to do that, but I'm sending you. Moses begins coming up with all kinds of excuses. Who am I? And God says, don't worry about it. I'm with you. And then he says, well, who are you? I am who I am. Or the translation can also be, I will be who I will be. What if they don't believe me? What if I have this great thing that I'm going to go to these folks and say, I'm going to liberate you, but they don't receive that? What if they don't believe me? This is in chapter 4, verse 1. God gives them some signs to do, if they don't believe the first sign, they'll believe the second sign. He says to him, please, Lord, I have never been eloquent and I am slow of speech. That sounds pretty stinking eloquent to me, Moses. Finally, he gets honest. Lord, just send someone else. Chapter 4, verse 13. What is it about change? Because that's what God's asking Moses to do. He's asking Moses to change. To step out from being a person. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But God has a purpose for Moses, which is much, much greater. But it's going to require a huge change at a point in life where most people are not thinking about changing things at all. 80 years old. Guess what? You're going to live another 40 years. Change can be so hard. And part of the problem is that while the Israelites, Moses' own people, who he must have some kind of passion for because of that attempt and the murder 40 years before, even though they are slaves, Moses is a slave as well. He's a slave to fear of going back. He's a slave to his past. And now God is asking him to go back and confront that as well. Change may mean, for us, facing our own past, going back to where things went wrong or awry. We may have said something or done something that was wrong and trying to make amends. Our 12-step programs have a step in which we make a list of everyone that we have harmed and become willing to make amends to. Now, quite often, I think that gets confused, that word amends, to just simply going up and apologizing to someone. And you know, that's an important thing. That's an important thing, to apologize, to recognize that. But that's not what the word in that particular step is. It's make amends. And that means to try to make things right, to try to fix things. It will not undo the past, but it will sure make the future a whole lot easier. See, Moses has to go back where everything went so wrong and try not only to bring his own personal liberation, but also to bring about a social liberation of an oppressed people. And he's 80 years old and he's sitting there thinking to himself, who am I? How can I do this? I'm not a great speaker. I'm not a great priest or theologian. I even went to the other school in town. And God says, I will be with you. I will be with you. Whenever we are encountering changes in our life, and we will encounter changes in our lives, it's inevitable. What's that saying? The only thing constant is change, besides death and taxes. Change. And so we're going to encounter that, whether it's a change in our community or our neighborhood, or it's a change in our family situations. There was a time when Billy and I thought for sure we're going to be empty nesters at least by the time we're 60. Guess what? We got one little acolyte in the family, and we're getting a second one in January. Be 80 years old with the littlest ones graduating from school. Lord! Yeah, that's not the way we thought it was going to be. But you know what? We're blessed. I know grandparents now that would give anything to spend any time with their grandkids. So it's a blessing. I didn't start out being a preacher. I was a computer programmer. I was at the top of my game. And the Lord said to me, and I'm sure it was the Lord, because I don't know what else it would have been. It was completely out of context. You were going to, why does God always speak up here? You notice that? You were going to be a Methodist preacher once. And I got to tell you, I was at the top of my game. How are we ever going to live on a part-time student pastor's salary? How is that going to work? Billy's mom was freaking out because she thought we might be getting paid in turnips like her father was as a Pentecostal preacher. She said, no, the Methodists, they give salaries. Oh, man. But even still, and you know what? Everything fell into place. I couldn't do it. I could not see a way to pay for college and bring up my family with that big of a cut in salary. And not only did God provide it, the only thing I paid for were books. Not only was that provided for, but we did more traveling together as a family, internationally, and we did more things together as a family. Now, we had struggles. We had some definite trials, but I want to tell you, God saw us through all of that. And yeah, I was about 40 when he said, you were going to be a Methodist preacher. Well, I'm no Moses, that's for sure. But God calls Moses from where he is. Things are comfortable. They're familiar. And he calls him to go and do something scary. And friends, there may be changes in your life that you're encountering. Maybe it's a health diagnosis. And everything has changed. And there's going to be some challenges in it. Maybe it's none of that stuff. Maybe you're in a really good place right now. But Jesus gave us a command to go and make disciples. To go and make disciples. Who did he give that to? Well, he gave it to the 12, and then they passed it down to all the pastors and ministers and popes and whatnot, grandpoobahs and all that stuff in the church. And they're supposed to do, no. He gave that to you. He gave that to you. And me. But to each and every one of us. And when you talk with people, it's like, well, who am I? I haven't been seminary trained. I haven't spent time. I don't think I still got dust on my Bible. I got that when I turned 8 years old. In 3rd grade, they did it in church. And, I think it's the Revised Standard Version. I can't read that one either. Who am I? Who are you? I don't know enough about you, God. What if they don't believe you? They won't believe you until they see the change in your life. I'm not eloquent. I don't know how to say the things. I'm not a Billy Graham. No, only Billy Graham is Billy Graham. But there are people that we encounter every day in our lives. I've shared this over and over again. I'm going to keep pounding this into the ground until it really sticks in and it drives a sense of passion in your hearts, friends. Only 17% of Georgians consider their faith to be very important in their lives. We could fill this church up 5-6 times over. Church down the street could do that. Churches around the corners, little churches, anywhere. We could do that day in, day out, and we still would just be barely scratching the surface of reaching people with good news. What's the good news? The good news is God is with us. God has not forgotten us. God has given us some guidelines to follow. He's not going to force us to follow them, but He's given us guidelines to direct us and a purpose in our lives. And a grander purpose, which is to bring all people back into a reconciled state with Him. And not just all people, but all creation. Yes, God is going to do that. But for some reason, I still don't fully understand it, why God chooses to do this. He chooses to work through other people. God says to Moses, I am going to bring the Israelites out of slavery, but I'm sending you. He does this over and over again with the Bible, doesn't he? I don't know why God didn't just wake Pharaoh up out of a dream and say, what you're doing is wrong. It's not right. You need to stop doing it. And do it in such a way that Pharaoh would say, yeah, you're right. I don't understand why God would not do that. Except that God chooses to work through people. We worship a relational God. This is a God who prefers to work through people, with people, for His people. And you can do that in a way that I can't, with the people that you encounter, with the people that you see, because you're going to go a whole myriad of places this week. Even if it's just in the doctor's office. I'm not going to that doctor's office. I may go to a different one. I do go to some of y'all's doctors. I may not shop in the same places you shop at. I may not stand in the same, I may not pump my gas at the same place you pump your gas. I may not eat at the same restaurants that you may be. See, we all are going to go to different places. You can reach more people than I ever can. And God calls us to do that. Well, what does this evangelism look like? Because that's what we're talking about here. It's simply sharing the good news. When you go out in public, act like Jesus would act in public. Or simply put, and I'm cleaning this up some, don't be a jerk. You go out to eat at a restaurant today, tip well. I'm talking with waitresses, oh,